Good evening, everybody. I had to figure out what time of day it was, what the date is. Thank you all for coming this evening. We are having some issues with our audio system. We will, at this point in time, not be using microphones. And I acknowledge that the only people with microphones are the people up here at the temporary dais, if you will. We are going to ask that, we good on the audio?
Yeah, he's just got to turn his phone off.
Okay. That if you are to speak this evening, that you make certain you project, and people hear me on the other side of the room, okay? All right, and you'll notice the cadence I'm using too. I'm trying not to talk like this because other people might not get it by the time it makes it to them back to me. So I'm trying to talk a little bit more slowly and I'm trying to project a little bit louder voice, but not yell, okay? All right, I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting. Good evening and welcome to tonight's Monroe City Council meeting. This is a special workshop meeting for Tuesday, January 30th, 2024. The time right now is 5:41 p.m. And I'm going to ask that our clerk, Wyckoff, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mayor. Council members present and establishing a quorum are council members Fulcher, Beaumont, Hanford, Walker, and Scarborough.
Thank you. And Councilmember Gamble said that he would not be able to be here this evening. There was a loss in his family. Our hearts and our prayers are with him this evening, and his absence is excused. All right. Going to ask that Councilmember Fulcher please lead us in the pledge.
Of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Before we begin the discussion items under item number 4, just a couple of items on how this meeting is run right now. First, everybody will notice an orange flag in the, each one of you will notice an orange flag in the middle of your table. Okay. Those of you who are council members will, of course, know about your orange flags. Council members, if you have a question, what do? Everybody's supposed to go like this. So if you've got a question that comes up, so that I know that to call on you, please raise your flag, okay? And I'm going to do my best during the meeting to make certain I'm scanning around. If you've got your flag up and I make eye contact with you and go like this, did I do that right? I go like that, it means I've got you. And what I'm doing is I'm maintaining this right here, okay? During the presentation, Clerk Wyckoff, Jody has asked that we get through the presentation. I encourage you to write down any questions you have during the presentation. And if your question is not answered during the presentation, we can come back and have those questions asked when the presentation is over. Any concerns about that? All right, thank you. We are now going to just go around the table and have each person introduce themselves. I'm going to start off with Councilmember Scarborough to my left, and we'll go this way. Councilmember Scarborough.
Councilmember Scarborough.
So when you identify yourself, please state your name and what board, commission, or council you're associated with. There you go.
Heather Fulcher, council member. Andy Beaumont, council member.
Your turn, Jake.
Jake Walker, city council member. I'm sorry, I was in my excitement to grab the flag, knocked over my coffee. So, oh, I'm sorry. Sorry for the distraction. Let's start off with some humor.
Sherry.
Sherry.
Sorry.
There he does everything.
Yeah, she does.
Kevin Hanford, council member.
Zach Wells, city attorney.
Jody Wyckoff, city clerk.
Ken Stickles, IT.
Thank God.
Roger Bacon, Choctaw.
Lauren Southhead. David Brown, Pascal.
Paul Patrino, planning.
Brand Blair, planning.
Good Washington Services.
Jeffrey Robinson, Parks.
Mariana Medina Park. He was at town development.
Now we're organized.
Yeah, like, she's on the board, I thought they were making your names were open to the public, are they not?
Oh,
They are.
goodness.
Oh, goodness. Oh, yeah.
Come back and say.
Greg Hodge, one, you guys. Carl, you left, yeah.
Cable, planning commission.
Planning Commission.
Keith Greg Park Board.
Deborah Knight, City Administrators.
We're gonna go through, we have a number of staff members in the audience, so I'll go ahead and start off with the guy right there with the stars on his collar. Jeff Trolley, I'm with.
Alan Edwards, I work at HR.
Edward and I also work in HR. It's not hungry.
Becky Hauser, Money Woman.
Greg Highland, Finance Department. Mike Farrell, Parks and Recreation. And my name is Jeffrey Thomas, I'm your tour guide for this evening. And thank you all very much for coming this evening. We do have a couple of attendees online, and if they're board or commission members, I'll press that they'll be listening during the meeting, but they also could be members of the public, just residents who are interested in the topic. With all that said, we're going to go ahead and move on to item number 4.1. Let me ask this question, Jody, you're going to take these all together, or do you want me to announce them separately as we go through them?
I do have a slide that separates them, so you can, announce the difference if you'd like, or we can just.
Okay, for the record, I'll just go ahead and announce we are now going to go through all three discussion items, 4.1, Open Government Training Act presentation and discussion. We will then go through 4.2, Code of Ethics, Conflict of Interest, and Appearance of Fairness Doctrine. And then we'll end with 4.3, 2023 Strategic Priorities, and 2023-2027 Strategic Plan Review. Is that last one to include everybody who is here?
If they would like to stick around, sure.
Okay, so the last one on there is primarily a conversation with the council, but other members of boards and commissions are welcome to attend as, as if members of the public. Okay, all right. So we'll start off with 4.1 and 4.2. For the Jody. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Couple things I forgot to ask you to mention before we started, just for council's and the public's knowledge, just a reminder that next week's meetings are canceled and the Public Safety Committee meeting was rescheduled for Thursday the 15th at 4 o'clock.
Thank you.
And that goes there. All right, so Mr. Lell and I are here to present on a couple of items. I'm going to be helping with the Public Records Act and Open Public Meetings Act. And then Mr. Lell will be working on the Code of Ethics, Conflict of Interest, and Appearance of Fairness Doctrine. My name is Jody Wyckoff. I am the city clerk for the city of Monroe. I've been with the city for a couple of years and in local government for a little over 20. I am the designated public records officer although Sherry, the cleaner-upper of coffee, is officially, she is our public records officer that actually deals with the public records requests and such. So just want to make sure I acknowledge that. We did give you a handout of the presentation tonight. You will notice that the handout does have extra slides in it that you will not see in the presentation. They're a little bit redundant, but still offer some information we thought was important for you to see for future reference, and also give you something to take notes on and write your questions down. As the mayor mentioned, we do want to hold questions until the end if we can. And so we encourage you to jot your questions down as they come up. Chances are we're going to end up answering them for you, but it's always good to write them down so you don't forget. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Jody. As I previously said, my name is Zach Monroe. For the last 14 years, I've been privileged to be the city attorney for the city of Monroe. It's great to actually be out here in person again. I think I know most of the council members, but I don't believe I've had the pleasure of meeting in person or being around many of the board and commissioners. So it's very nice to make your acquaintance, and I'm looking forward to hopefully giving you a little bit of insight into the topics that we're going to be discussing tonight. And as Jody indicated, we're going to work our way through what are known as the bundle of open government laws in Washington, primarily the Public Records Act and the Open Public Meeting Act. We're going to speak a little bit about the state statute and local codes addressing municipal conflict of interest and code of ethics, talk about the appearance of fairness doctrine, which applies primarily to land use decision making. And then we're going to have a brief overview of what you should and should not say in open session during your meetings, and cap it all off with some hopefully practical tips for each of you to use as you have in meetings in the future. As the Mayor indicated, we will be taking questions at the end, and if for whatever reason we run out of time or you have a burning question that just didn't get asked and answered tonight, please feel free to reach out to staff and they can either coordinate with me as needed and find a way to make sure that you get your question answered. Back to you, Jody.
All right, thank you. I am going to start with, I keep moving my mouse, so I have to go back over the screen. So most of you are here because the topics are so riveting, you just can't help saying it one more time. I know it. The other two of you are here because you're required to be here by something called the Open Government Trainings Act, which requires elected and appointed officials as well as certain staff members to take training on the Open Public Meetings Act, or OPMA, and the Public Records Act, or PRA, within 90 days of taking their seat and every 4 years thereafter. So we figured this was a really good time. It's the beginning of the year. Many of you are newly appointed or newly reappointed. Some of you have taken this training kind of recently, but it's always good as a refresher as well. And there was something else I was supposed to ask. Oh, because this is required training, we do have certificates that we will email out to you if you are interested. We will also keep one copy on our books for our records as well. There should be a sign-up sheet that is making its way around. If you could please write down your name, that you are in attendance. And for those of you attending virtually, we will sign you in on your behalf. I think that covers all my little notes. So, Public Records Act, exciting stuff. The purpose of the Public Records Act, oh, I'm also not going to read every slide verbatim, so there you go. It basically is because sorry, I am now reading it verbatim because I have to figure out where I left off. Requires full access to information concerning the conduct of government on every level. And what is a record in the Public Records Act? Well, it is very broadly defined. It includes the usual stuff that you would expect: letters, pictures, sounds, but it also includes film, video recordings, punched cards, if you're old enough to know what that is, floppy disks, sound recordings, all those are public records.
And I think one thing to remember about the state law definition of public record is that it hinges in large part with the writing being related somehow to government. Public record is any writing, very, very broadly construed and defined, as Jody indicated, but the writing has to somehow involve the functions, the operations of government. And that's what separates a public record from a private record. And what this statute that we're talking about, the PRA, governs is public records.
Thank you. So I often get asked, do I have to keep every single thing? Thankfully, no. The state does have what we call the retention schedules, and there's several of them for different agencies. And we have a group of staff members who are experts in their respective departments for their retention schedules. And there are some records that have to be kept forever. Some records have to be kept 60 years. The majority of them have to be kept less than 10 years. And a good chunk of them are what are called transitory records, which don't have to be kept until, or as soon as you're done with the need for it. And speaking of transitory records, this is a few slides that I mentioned are not going to be, they're in your packet, but not in here because I have a couple of redundant. Day-to-day traffic, like your meeting calendar invites, preliminary drafts that go back and forth between folks to develop a final draft, any notes you take, talking points, miscellaneous notifications for like a social gathering, FYIs on technology issues or campus events. And then this is kind of just a snapshot of what to do with those transitory records, which is, for the most part, delete if it's email, recycle when you're done with it. If you do have something that you think needs retained longer, let us know. And my big old, if in doubt, don't throw it out, please call us and we will help you decide if you need to keep it or transfer it to the city for longer retention. The one caveat I want to mention here is that even if it is a transitory record, if there is a public records request active and you've been notified to hold on to any records related to that topic, you must keep that record until it is either the public records request is done and we realize we don't need it, or you've been asked to transfer it to us for disclosure.
And I will chime in briefly there because this is an issue that has pretty significant legal significance. And that is, if you are aware that a record exists and you have it on you, or it's in your system, it's on your device, etc., and the city gets a public record request that document, that writing would be responsive to, and it's found that you have deliberately deleted that after the city has received the PRA request, that is a very, very difficult thing to explain to a judge who's probably going to be very, very angry when she looks across the bench at me in court trying to explain why the city did what it did. And the bottom line is public agencies get in trouble, severe trouble, when they deliberately destroy documents that should be produced in response to a PRA request. So that's a very important aspect of the PRA framework, is don't deliberately destroy a document when you know that it is subject to a pending request.
For text messages, we do get a lot of questions about text messages. When the PRA was written back in, what,
Early 70s.
72, something like that, obviously text messaging wasn't a thing. So the legislation has been trying to catch up with technology, but that's why any writing is very broadly construed, and it is construed to include text messages that are within the scope of employment. What a record that is within the scope of employment is a record prepared, owned, used, or retained by a state or local agency. As Mr. Lill said earlier, it has to have to do with the business of the government to be considered a public record. Let's see. And if you want to know all sorts of stuff about it, there are some sightings for some court cases that have to do with this if you're so inclined. Social media posts are also public records. Even a post on your personal account can be public record if the post was made within your scope of work. And to be within the scope of employment, your job must require it, your employer must direct it, or it must further the city's interest. And do we have to disclose every single record? Not really. There are numerous exemptions within the PRA and other statutes, including personal information like your social security number and driver's license, active police investigations, real estate appraisals, attorney-client privilege, juvenile records, and medical records are just an example.
And this is a very, very small sampling that you see on the slide right now of the types of documents, the types of information that are potentially exempt from the Public Records Act. If you read the exemptions verbatim, they take up page after page after page after page. They're sprinkled throughout state and federal law. They're not just all codified within the PRA itself. The bottom line is there are more exemptions than you could probably begin to even memorize. But what Jody has put on the slide, I think, are the ones that are most applicable to your daily lives as public officials, and they're the ones that you need to be most conscious of. The good news is that you don't need to begin to memorize the list of exemptions. You have a very, very competent city clerk and public records staff sitting here with Ms. Simonson and Ms. Wyckoff being the tip of that spear. and they do the heavy lifting for the city whenever a public record request is received, in determining which part of which documents should be redacted or blacked out because they contain sensitive or exempt information, and which categories of documents can be withheld from disclosure because all four corners of them are exempt from disclosure in the first instance. Again, what you see on the page are just a small sampling of the type of records that are not subject to disclosure, and that again is something that your staff will address on a case-by-case basis whenever it receives a public record request.
Yeah, and kind of to dovetail into that is, he mentioned redacting. Just because something has a social security number on it doesn't mean we're going to hold back the entire document. We black it out using a redaction software, and then we release the rest of the document. So just because you might have something that has sensitive information on it doesn't mean you wouldn't be giving it to us. We would still need that document. We would redact the exempt information. So our 3 helpful tips: contact myself or Sherry to make a transfer arrangements for records that need to be retained. Any record existing at the time the city receives a records request must be disclosed regardless of the retention value. And if you do receive a request for records, which does happen on occasion, you'll get an email from a resident or even a friend saying, hey, can you get me a copy of fill in the blank? That's a public records request. So get that over to us so that we can properly fulfill that. We have legal obligations to respond within 5 business days. So we definitely get it to us sooner rather than later. And I think, oh, this is the fun stuff. These are the violations and penalties that can happen if you violate the PRA. Just some examples: Snohomish County, $575,000 and $600,000 negotiated settlements. DSHS was over $525,000. City of Monroe even had to pay $157,000 in a settlement. The biggest one on the screen, you can see, Seattle had to make a $1.5 million payment over a lawsuit related to deleted text messages.
And I think, I'm glad that this particular slide is up and that there's some cutting and pasting from recent headlines. I think it helps to underscore that these issues regarding public records for a public agency, which we're all part of, this is not some sort of theoretical abstract concern. There are real life stories, there are real life issues and real life consequences that apply for failing to comply with this statute. So it's very important to remember, in a worst case scenario, the city could be subject to a damage award like this by someone who contends successfully in court that the city failed to give up public records when it was supposed to, made inappropriate redactions or withholdings, or destroyed records in the face of a PRA request. So this is, I think, a very important reminder that what we're talking about here is very, very real.
Okay, the next 2 slides, we've gone through this material really fast. Some of you have seen it several times over. Some of you, this is the first time. The next 2 slides are some scenarios, and we're going to ask yes or no if you think it's a violation of PRA or not. Don't be embarrassed to raise your hand when we call on answers. If you get it wrong, that's why we're here. Okay, so let's see if my animation worked. I'll read this because it's going to be way too difficult to read. A council member received this text message from a resident he knows from his city. The 2 had recently met at a coffee shop and had a discussion. The text was sent to the council member's personal cell phone number. Is this a public record? And the text message reads, "It was good meeting with you this week at the coffee shop and catching up about your interests as a council member. I don't envy your position at this week's council meeting. Do the right thing. Vote yes on the plan to build a new city hall." Do you think this is a public record? If you do, raise your hand. Yay!
I think we can all go home now.
Yeah.
I'm breathing a deep sigh of relief.
Yeah. So it is a public record because the text was sent to a council member's personal cell phone, but the content of the message clearly relates to the conduct of government. The sender is asking the council member to vote yes on a matter that will be coming before the council for a vote. And the sender is also referring to a meeting between the two related to city council business. Okay, next one. This is a page from a council member's personal calendar purchased with her own money. She keeps personal information in her calendar, and occasionally there is a reminder related to council meetings. Is this a public record? If you think it is, please raise your hand. It is not.
Out of abundance of caution, I was.
Look at that.
Mr. Mayor, I still like your answer, Mr. Mayor.
It's not a public record based on the purpose, use, and content of the document. The calendar is council member's personal calendar that she purchased with her own money, uses it for her own personal use to keep track of personal scheduling and commitments, and the entries relate to matters that are solely personal, except for the occasional reference to a meeting. And these are some numbers that Sherry put together for me. She's in charge of our, what we call a JLARC report, which is we have to report to the state once a year on the number of public records requests we receive, how many man hours that takes, how much money it costs us, et cetera, et cetera. So in the last 4 years, you can see it has been trending up. Although slightly for the last 3 years, 2023 saw a pretty significant jump, and we don't see that slowing down. So if you think like, hey, you know, we don't get that many, it's fine. I'm sure I don't have very many records responsive to requests. Although a majority of these requests are for simple things like collision reports, thank you. We do have a decent number of very complex requests, and one that we've been working on for over 2 years at this point.
We're on 3 years.
Yeah, we're working on our 3rd year for one single request, in addition to the other 1,567 requests. And then this is a slide that Sherry put together that I love. It's called the filter approach. If you don't want these people to read whatever you put into a text message, social media post, handwritten note, just think about the people that are going to see it if it is responsive to a records request. The records officer is going to see it. Their supervisor is going to see it. The city attorney will probably see it. The requester is going to end up seeing it, which could end up on the front page of the newspaper, which means that your family could see it. Embarrassment is not an exemption that I have been able to find in the PRA. Although I'm sure many of people that have been caught with certain public records, and I could tell you stories that I won't, just because you don't want it out there doesn't mean it's not responsive. We are required by law to disclose that record. And that ends PRA. Over to you.
Thank you, Jody. So the second open government statute or Washington law that we're going to be discussing tonight is the Open Public Meetings Act. And how many of you have heard of that statute here? That's great. You're ahead of the game already. This again is a part of the bundle of Washington laws that was enacted in the early 1970s that are kind of euphemistically known as sunshine laws or open government statutes. And this kind of came out of that late 60s, early Watergate era, where there was a lot of distrust of government and a lot of desire at all levels of government to ensure that the agents of government, public officials, public employees, etc., were being open and transparent in their activities, because there was a perception at the time, I think probably correct to some extent, that a lot of the governmental business of each community at each level of government, local, state, and federal, was being done in dark, smoke-filled back rooms and outside of the public eye. So the whole purpose of these sunshine laws was to stop that dynamic and allow the sunlight to enter into the room and require that government operate to the extent reasonably practical within the public's oversight. And the Open Public Meeting Act is the Washington legislature's enactment of that requirement for governing bodies of public agencies. So as you can see, I won't quote them all, but from the slide that's up in front of you right now, There are several preface statements from the OPMA that are listed here, and they're all geared toward ensuring transparency in government operations. Next slide, please. So the OPMA applies to meetings of governing bodies of public agencies. So the first question is, what's a meeting? Well, a meeting occurs whenever there's a majority of the public or the governing body in question present and where action is being taken. A quorum is essentially a majority of the particular body, whether it's a city council, a board, or commission, that's at issue here. So if it's a 7-member city council, a quorum to create a meeting would be at least 4 council members. For a 5-member body, it would be a core nucleus of 3 members to satisfy the meeting requirement. And as the slide indicates, there are situations where less than the majority of the governing body can constitute a meeting under the OPMA, particularly when you're dealing with council committees. Here, if a smaller group of council members or board members are meeting with the intended purpose of, for example, taking testimony or acting on behalf of the larger body, that committee meeting, even though it doesn't involve a quorum of members, can be subject to the Open Public Meetings Act. So the 3 main principles or requirements of the OPMA are up on the screen right now. The first is that all meetings of the governing body must be open and all persons must be permitted to attend. And there are some exceptions to that that we'll talk about later, but that is the general mandate of the Open Public Meeting Act. Your business as a governing body should be done in public so that your constituents can witness it, can view it, can hold you to account. The second requirement is that there can't be any secret ballots. This is a throwback to decades and decades ago where you'd have these sort of secret votes and no one would be able to hold their public officials accountable because no one knew how they actually voted. It was all done essentially through these secret smoke and mirrors procedures. That's prohibited under current law with the OPMA. And then finally, this is an important consequence, and there are several of them under the Open Public Meeting Act. Any ordinance, resolution, rule, regulation, or order that is adopted at a non-public meeting, is adopted in violation of the OPMA, is invalid. So it's really, really important that we follow our required procedures for the OPMA whenever we hold a public meeting, so that the action that the council, the boards, or commissions that take at those meetings are not later invalidated. Okay. So action is also a legal term of art under the Open Public Meeting Act, and it's very, very broadly construed and defined. As indicated on the slide, it includes discussion, deliberation, public testimony, review, and evaluation. Pretty much everything that you as public bodies do in an open public meeting would fall within this definition of action. Very, very broadly construed and defined term. Within that category of action, there is a subcategory of final action, and this is a more formal undertaking that particularly the city council is involved with at every one of its meetings, where they're actually voting on something. They can vote to adopt an ordinance or pass a resolution or vote to approve the minutes or to pay a particular bill. All of those are considered final actions because the council is essentially expressing its collective position on a particular matter that comes before it. Next slide, please. We talked about the committee. I won't belabor that point, but just keep in mind that if you are part of a smaller group of council or board members and you've been charged with doing something, charged with taking action by the larger body as a whole, like conducting a hearing, taking testimony, or taking some other type of formal action on behalf of the board, commission, or council, that type of committee meeting can also be subject to the OPMA's requirements. And I do want to touch briefly on the kind of meetings that the OPMA defines. The first and the most standard type is a regular meeting. And this is a meeting of a governing body that is the schedule for which is prescribed by rule or ordinance or statute. So most of the city council at Monroe's regular meetings, I believe, are the first through the fourth Tuesday of every month, and that's established by both the Monroe Municipal Code and your local rules of procedure. Because there is a set defined schedule for those meetings, those are considered regular meetings. And with regular meetings, council and various boards and commissions of which you're members have a lot of latitude in what you can do. You aren't constrained only by what's listed on the agenda, although you have to have your agenda published at least 24 hours in advance. At a regular meeting, you actually can add items to the agenda and you can take final action on those items. So that's the primary difference or a primary distinguishing feature of a regular meeting. Every meeting that's not a regular meeting is considered a special meeting. So here, in this context, are meetings that don't have a specific schedule. For example, the council needs to meet on a date that isn't their regular meeting night. They can do that as long as they call a special meeting. And there are rules in the Open Public Meeting Act for scheduling and effectuating a public meeting. The first and most important one is the city has to send out notice of that to all of the various council or board or commission members that are on the particular governing body in question at least 24 hours in advance. And we also have to publish or issue an agenda, a special meeting notice, indicating which matters that the council or board or commission is going to be addressing at that meeting. And the city is prohibited from taking final disposition or final action at a special meeting on any matter that's not listed on that 24-hour advance agenda. So in that specific context, dealing with special meetings, the city is fairly constrained. You can't step outside the box of what you told the public and other council or board members that you were going to take action on 24 hours ago. So those are the two main types of meetings, regular meetings and special meetings. Now we're going to talk a little bit about one of the pitfalls in modern meeting practice, and that is this concept of electronic communications. As Jody indicated in her public records presentation, these statutes that we're talking about typically date back to the early 1970s. And in many cases, modern technology has outpaced the original legislation. And one great example of that is the Open Public Meeting Act. When that statute was first adopted in the early 1970s, there was no such thing as email or text messages or any social media like Facebook, obviously. This is a completely different era, 50-some years ago, so this wasn't within the consciousness of the legislature when the OPMA was adopted. But in the modern era, courts have struggled with determining what a meeting means, even if a quorum, a majority of members of a particular council or board participate, but they aren't there physically. And the current prevailing thought is that you can have a meeting of council members or board members even if a quorum of them are not actually there together physically in the same spot. And that can happen through Zoom or Teams or other type of social media. It can also happen through things like text messages where various members are chiming in at different points with different comments. That as long as that involves a quorum of council members, either right then in the moment or over a 2 or 3 day period, that can still be a public meeting. And that's one of the things that we need to be concerned about as we keep these OPMA compliance issues in mind. The tip on this slide, I think, is a really important one. Again, trying to keep on the right side of the law as it relates to OPMA compliance. If you receive an email that has been sent to all of the council members, or all the board members of which you're a member of that body, the strong recommendation is not to reply all. So every other recipient in the original email string gets the benefit of your response, because that, under some circumstances, can constitute a meeting under the Open Public Meeting Act. You might not have intended that, it might have not have been your original intent, but if you have multiple council members or board members chiming in on top of each other, sharing their thoughts by email about public business, they're technically taking action and holding a meeting outside the confines of an open public meeting that should have been either scheduled as part of a regular meeting or noticed as part of a special meeting. And that's the real concern in the modern era. This is what's known as a serial meeting. It can happen through a series of telephone calls between multiple council members. It can happen through email exchanges, text exchanges, social media postings on Facebook or Twitter. So it's very, very important to keep that in mind as you kind of navigate the landscape of OPMA compliance.
Something to add to that. So a couple of other tips that I've learned in my years of working with boards and commissions. One of the things I do as a staff member, so this is for my staff liaisons, is in the subject line, in all caps, do not reply all. So it's very obvious to the members receiving it that this is an email that is being sent out to the entire group and we should not reply all. An even better one, use the blind carbon copy, because our metadata will show that it was sent out to everybody. So if we have to disclose it for a records request, we're covered there. And there's no chance of someone accidentally hitting reply all and starting a serial meeting. So this is my next slide, my fun one. Okay, so I have an example. We need to kind of like liven things up around here. It's getting a little stale with our content, right? Not our presenter, our content. Okay, I'm gonna set the stage here. In the enchanting town of Disneyville, a magical community governed by a council of beloved characters, a brewing controversy has set the stage for a series of discussions reminiscent of a serial meeting. It all begins when a concerned resident, Cinderella, takes to social media to voice her worries about the upcoming proposal to limit the number of mice allowed in each household. She believes it is a direct attack on her fairy godmother's helpful mice companions. Councilmember Simba quickly snaps a screenshot and sends it via email over to Councilmember Ariel, asking how she plans to vote on the controversial issue. Councilmember Ariel replies to Simba with her perspective on the matter and calls Councilmember Mickey to see where Mickey stands on the issue. Meanwhile, over a cup of coffee, Councilmember Donald Duck and Councilmember Simba delved into the details of the proposal, sharing their thoughts on whether other enchanted forest animals should be considered in the mouse count limit. These Disneyville council members have engaged in a serial meeting by communicating with one another, even if not all at once or in the same format, about a matter that is before them as a council. Thank you, ChatGPT, for.
Those are all really valuable examples of what not to do in the modern era there. And it's also a reminder of the pitfalls and the traps for the unwary, because things like email and texts and phone calls and social media, they're so readily accessible. It's so easy to send off a message without thinking through the potential repercussions and who might otherwise be on the other end receiving that message, and whether or not there's going to be a potential quorum created. So I think a great reminder from Jody.
And Disneyville.
And ChatGPT. There are some exceptions to the Open Public Meeting Act, and just like the PRA, when you're dealing with public records, has numerous exemptions or exceptions to the general rule that public records need to be disclosed. The Open Public Meeting Act has several exemptions in it and exceptions that allow the council to meet behind closed doors for the purpose of discussing certain topics. These are called executive sessions. Those of you who are on the council are very familiar with that. I think this is less common for the city's other boards and commissions. But essentially, an executive session is when the city council essentially excludes the public from a particular part of the meeting for the purpose of discussing one of these listed exemptions on your screen. This is not a full list. but I think it's exemplary of the type of topics that are appropriate for the council to discuss without the public viewing it. And these actually, I think, make fairly good common sense. First of all, the council can discuss with its legal counsel, me or some other attorney that the city hires, pending or potential litigation. Now, this does not give the council a license to simply talk behind closed doors about any random topic just because an attorney happens to be in the room. But if the council is engaged in a lawsuit or might be engaged in a lawsuit or is considering a course of action that implicates some legal risk that they want to talk about with me or another attorney behind closed doors, it makes sense for them to be able to do that without the public and other parties that might be adverse to the city in that sort of potential litigation listening in on the call. So that's the first exemption under the OPMA that allows the council to hold an executive session or a closed door session to discuss that type of topic. The second potential exemption under the OPMA deals with real estate matters. And here, it's kind of twofold. The council can go behind closed doors and discuss the potential acquisition or the selection of a particular piece of property that the council is considering acquiring, either through eminent domain or through purchase. And the reason for that makes sense too, if you think about it from a public good standpoint. It doesn't make any sense for the council to have those sort of discussions in open session where it would be divulging, for example, the outcome of its real estate appraisals or its negotiating position as it gets ready to buy or sell property. And the exemptions here apply both to the acquisition of real estate interest and the disposition or sale of real estate interest, or when the council is going to consider the amount of money or rental amount that it's going to be leasing its own property to a private party to. The next potential executive session topic would be to evaluate the qualifications for public employment or to review employee performance. And here again, there's kind of a thread of common sense that weaves its way through this exemption. Those are the sort of sensitive issues that you typically wouldn't expect to have in open session. When you are considering a particular employee's performance, you typically don't want to do that in a crowded room full of people and broadcast that onto the internet or to the local television station. That's something you typically want to do behind closed doors. Same issue applies when the council is considering hiring someone. For example, if the council wanted to hire a new police chief or a city administrator, you would want to have that sort of discussion, a frank discussion of qualifications behind closed doors. And there's also a sidebar to that. If particular applicants from, for example, other cities are looking to fill one of the vacancies at the city of Monroe in a position like that, they won't want their existing employers to know that they're interviewing for that position. So another way to kind of keep that information generally confidential is for the city council to be able to review that type of thing in private without the public overseeing it. And then finally, the evaluation of candidates seeking to fill vacancies in elective office. If there's a vacancy on the city council, if one of the council members has to step off for one reason and it creates a vacancy, the council can meet behind closed doors to consider the candidates that have applied to fill that vacancy. One thing to keep in mind, though, for all of these exemptions, the final decision by the council or board that results from a closed session discussion, executive session discussion, almost always needs to happen in open session. The council typically cannot vote behind closed doors. It can discuss, it can evaluate, it can deliberate to some extent, but when it comes time to actually vote, to express a collective position on who the city is going to hire or what property the city is going to acquire, or whether it's going to start a lawsuit against another party, that sort of formal final action almost always needs to happen back in open session in front of the public, and there needs to be a record made of that.
I did want to add one thing. There is another type of session that can be done behind closed doors and actually does not require to be on an agenda or even be noticed, and that's called a closed session. and that is related to collective bargaining. So sometimes you will hear the mayor announce that we're going to adjourn this meeting and then we're going to go into closed session. That is what it is related to.
Excellent point. Whenever the council wants to hold an executive session, it needs to announce that publicly. So in open session, the mayor will typically say, we are now going to convene an executive session for the purpose of, and then the law requires the mayor to explain what the statutory basis is for the executive session. So to cite the RCW provision, the Revised Code of Washington, that allows that sort of topic to be discussed behind closed doors, and also explain publicly how long the executive session is intended to last. And that's also, I think, fairly commonsensical in that you don't want the council to say that they're going to be in executive session for an hour and then come out 5 minutes later when everyone is in the audience is off getting a drink or in the parking lot, and then have the council take action without anyone there to watch it. So it's important for the council the mayor to explain how long the council is going to be talking behind closed doors and when the council anticipates coming back into open session and reconvening the open part of the meeting. Okay. We'll touch on this issue later on when we get to our municipal ethics presentation, but there's a really important corollary to the executive or closed session dynamic, and that is the need for anyone who's in an executive session or closed session to keep the information that is discussed behind closed doors confidential. It is against state law to divulge information that a particular board or council or commission member receives in confidence through his or her official position. And a classic example of that is divulging executive session information, things that were talked about behind closed doors between the council and the city attorney, things that were discussed behind closed doors regarding a potential real estate deal, that sort of issue. All of that needs to be kept strictly confidential unless the council itself as a group votes to waive the privilege or allow that type of information to be publicly disseminated. And one other point from the slide that's up right now, I think it's a really good one, and that is now that we're in this sort of virtual meeting era and various of you as board, council, and commission members might be participating in a particular meeting remotely, to the extent that you're at your house, in your study, in your living room, etc., and there are other people in your family, in your friend group, etc., who are there in the room with you, it's very important for you to kind of shoo them out and preserve the confidentiality of the executive session to ensure that what is discussed by the council in those limited circumstances stays amongst the council. So up on the screen right now is kind of where the rubber meets the road on the OPMA and why this is something more than just a theoretical or abstract concern. There are real life consequences, including in a worst case scenario, financial penalties for violations of this statute. I'm not going to dwell on this. It's a very, I think it's a knowledge-based standard, but my strong recommendation always is to keep this in the back of your mind, that the consequence for an OPMA violation of having, particularly knowing one, is that there's a potential monetary consequence, and to the city, there's a potential consequence in having whatever action may have been taken at an illegal, unlawful meeting invalidated. And that can cause havoc in the city's operations if the ordinance or it intended to pass or the bills it intended to pay are suddenly voided because the meeting itself was incorrectly formatted or conducted under the Open Public Meeting Act.
Okay, I'm going to take over for just a quick second because your packet may be slightly, I literally just rearranged the slides as he was talking because I realized that the slides I had listed after that didn't make sense in that order, so I just rearranged them. So I apologize if your packet doesn't follow along exactly. Go back over to here. So this is another Q&A. Don't be embarrassed if you answer incorrectly, but there we go. 3 council members who are members of a 5-member city council are attending a large group training session at a conference. They're sitting together at the same table and are discussing a matter which is scheduled to come before council for a vote at an upcoming meeting. The city did not provide public notice of this as a meeting. Would this constitute a violation of the OPMA? If you think yes, please raise your hand. You are correct. Such a discussion among council members would violate the OPMA because it would involve a majority of council members discussing a matter that's coming up for a vote. And, oh, sorry, I thought it was going to also say, and we did not notice the meeting.
But that's actually a correct point.
Yeah, thank you. I was like, wait, that answer doesn't include that. Okay, Councilmember Sharon Jones and Councilmember Carl Smith are on a 5-member city council. Today, Councilmember Jones called Councilmember Smith. Sharon says, "Hi, Carl. I'm taking a non-binding informal poll of my fellow council members about the contract the council will be considering at the next meeting. I'd like to get a sense of whether or not you plan to vote for it." Carl says, "Well, Sharon, I'm not sure if I'll vote for it or not." Well, Carl, informally, what do you think? Do you think you'll vote for the contract? Is this type of informal polling allowed under the OPMA? If you think it is, please raise your hand. 100%. Voting by a majority of the council, even by informal polling, would constitute action by the council, and the council can only legally take action at a meeting open to the public. I think we're actually done with this portion. I'm just going to wrap up with these last 2 slides that works for you.
Absolutely. I'll
So-
chime in after you're done.
So as I mentioned, this is required training that you just accomplished, so give yourself a pat on the back. All boards and commission members, councils, including any secretaries or clerks for the governing bodies need to take it, and public records officers and record management officers also need to take certain trainings. There is more training available if you want. There are certain tiny sections of these acts that we did not touch on, like my notice requirements and how my minutes need to be written and that kind of stuff. And so if you want to get into that kind of detail, you can go you can get it from our website, but it's on AWC's website, the training. They're each about 45 minutes long. And that's that piece.
So the next legal principle that we're going to be discussing tonight is the Municipal Code of Ethics. This is primarily based in Washington statute, which prescribes a series of ethical limitations and standards for each of you as public officers. In addition to the state statute and the state law requirements, the city of Monroe has adopted a local code requirement that's codified in the Monroe Municipal Code that has language, at least in some areas, that's different from the state law. So what you see on your screen right now is the overriding fundamental thrust of the state conflict of interest statute, and that is, and I'll quote this because I do think that the language is important: "No municipal officer shall be beneficially interested, directly or indirectly, in any contract which may be made by, through, or under the supervision of such officer, in whole or in part, or which may be made for the benefit of his or her office, or accept directly or indirectly any compensation, gratuity, or reward in connection with such contract from any other person beneficially interested therein." So that is sort of the 10,000-foot look level of the state conflict of interest statute. And it is, by its terms, geared primarily toward contract conflict of interest. I see this, at least in its core thrust, as being somewhat commonsensical. As a public officer, if you're going to be writing checks on behalf of the city, you don't want to be the person on the other end of those checks who's receiving them. It basically is a prohibition against self-dealing. So if you have an interest in a particular contract, That is what should make your antennas go up under this particular law. It's not, however, as broad and all-encompassing as the language I just quoted to you would otherwise seem. And there is an exception in the statute, actually a series of 4 exceptions, that in many cases effectively swallow the rule. And this is essentially the state legislature realizing that it would be almost impossible to hold every public officer to the high categorical strict standard of the law that I just quoted to you and prohibit every conceivable type of contract interest that a particular officer may have in dealing with written agreements or contracts. So what the law allows for is this concept of a remote interest. And I'm going to quote this, and I apologize for being verbose here, but it is, I think, important. A municipal officer is not interested in a contract within the meaning of the statute that I just read from if the officer has only a remote interest in the contract and the extent of the interest is disclosed to the governing body of the municipality of which the officer is an officer and noted in the official minutes or similar records of the municipality prior to the formation of the contract, and thereafter the governing body approves or authorizes, approves, or ratifies the contract good faith, sorry, my screen is blurry.
Yeah, in good faith.
By a vote of its membership sufficient for the purpose without counting the vote or votes of the officers having the remote interest. Now here is the real key of this remote interest exception. If your only interest in a particular contract is that of a non-salary officer of a non-profit corporation, or that of an employee or agent of a contracting party where your compensation is entirely made up of fixed wages or salary, there's no contingent compensation, or you're simply a landlord or tenant of a contracting party, or you're the holder of less than 1% of the shares of a particular corporation, which is the other contracting party. If any of those exceptions apply, you don't have a beneficial interest that would be categorically prohibited under Washington law. You have instead a remote interest in the contract in question. Now, if you have one of these remote interests, there's a particular procedure that needs to be followed. First of all, as the text that I quoted indicates, you have to publicly disclose this interest. That has to be formally noted in the city's formal minutes. And then after that point, the governing body has to approve the contract without counting your vote, meaning that your vote can't count. And this is, I think, a really key portion of the statute that I'll also read, which is that none of those provisions, none of these exceptions, are applicable to any officer interested in a contract, even if the officer's interest is only remote, if the officer influences or attempts to influence any other officer of the municipality of which he or she is an officer to enter the contract. So the key there is to avoid doing or saying anything that could be construed as trying to influence someone else to vote a particular way on a contract that you may have a remote interest in. It's a lot of words, and I apologize for that. It's somewhat of a verbose statute. But I think if you look at it in its core elements, I think it's a very commonsensical approach. And it's so broad that it largely swallows the rule of that general categorical prohibition on conflict of interest that I started out speaking about. And I'm going to lapse briefly into a quick side note that I understand that there has been, at least at some point in the relatively recent past in Monroe, some question about what it means to not influence another municipal officer in a case where you've got a remote interest only. If you read the statute, it doesn't prescribe what particular steps you have to take beyond what I've already quoted. It has always been my recommendation, I think this is the prevailing legal view, certainly amongst city attorneys, that avoiding an attempt to influence someone else should involve abstaining from the vote, abstaining from the discussion, and leaving the room. So your mere presence there on the dais as the contract is being noted for approval or disapproval isn't clouding the issue or otherwise changing or potentially changing one of the other council member or board members' minds. Next slide, please.
I actually wanted to go back one real quick, because there's one little highlight, oops, wrong screen, sorry. The little caveat at the bottom, if you think there is a potential conflict of interest, even remote, on a particular agenda item, please let staff know well in advance of the meeting so we can, in most cases, we're gonna have to contact Zach to verify if there is going to be an issue and you will need to recuse yourself from the discussion. But please let us know well in advance of the meeting so that we can help navigate you through that process.
Okay. So as indicated, the main thrust of the state ethics statute is really geared toward contract conflict of interest that you individually may have in a particular city contract. But there are a few other categories of prohibited acts that the state ethics statute addresses and technically prohibits. One of those is you cannot use your official position as a municipal officer to secure special privileges or exemptions for yourself or other people. So for example, if you've got a building project at home and you want to build your backyard shed to a height that's technically not allowed under the city's zoning code, it's inappropriate for you to go to the city's community development director and say, hey, listen, I know this technically isn't compliant with the city's code, but I really want to build my shed higher, my structure higher than that. And I'm a council member, so I should be able to do that. That's attempting to use your influence, your position, to gain a special privilege for yourself. That is categorically prohibited. And the easy rule of thumb there is, as a public official, you are subject to all the other rules and regulations and standards and procedures and requirements that apply to all of your other constituents. There's no special privilege that inheres in anyone's office that would allow you to circumvent or avoid or violate any of the city's standard regulations, whether it's zoning, speeding, development, anything else. You're essentially subject to the same laws as everyone else. And that's a long way of saying no one is above the law, not even public officials. Second, there is a prohibition in the state ethics statute against giving or receiving any compensation, gift, or reward related to your official position or your official work for the city, except for this from the city itself. So for your public work, for the service that you provide to the city, you should be compensated exclusively by the city and only by the city. You shouldn't be receiving an income stream on the side from some business that the city regulates if it's related to your public service. Next, we talked about this briefly in our OPMA discussion, but it's prohibited for you to disclose confidential information or to use confidential information that you gain from your official position for your own personal benefit or for anyone else's benefit for that matter. And this is a little bit broader than the Open Public Meeting Act discussion that we previously had, because it applies not only to information that you may learn in executive session, when your board or commission or council meets behind closed doors to talk about a real estate deal or a potential litigation situation, or to evaluate the qualifications for an applicant for public employment. Anything that you learn that's confidential. It could be an attorney-client privilege memo that my office prepares and is sent to the city. It could be something that one of the other city officers shares with you in confidence about the city's operations. All of that needs to remain confidential and it should not be divulged publicly. And then finally, the state ethics statute prohibits any of you from accepting or engaging in any business or professional activity that is inconsistent with your official position with the city or would be likely to induce your disclosure of confidential information. Again, hopefully that's commonsensical. So that is the state conflict of interest statute or municipal ethics statute in a nutshell. The next legal principle that we'll be talking about briefly tonight is the appearance of fairness doctrine. This is a rule that the courts in Washington have developed about 50 years ago, again, during that kind of open government bent in the late 60s and early 70s. And again, the thrust here was trying to get away from smoke-filled backroom decision-making and make sure that when boards and commissions meet to talk about a particular topic, they do that in open and do that in a manner that's publicly visible. This appearance of fairness doctrine takes that concept and applies it to the specific area of land use decision-making. And even beyond that, more specifically, it's land use decision-making that is done in a quasi-judicial setting. Rewinding for a second, as municipal officials, particularly the city council, you wear multiple hats, depending on the specific context that you happen to be dealing with in a particular meeting. The vast majority of you, and the vast majority of time, you're going to be dealing in a legislative capacity. You're going to be involved in the formulation of policy. Proposing, considering, deliberating on, and ultimately adopting the rules and regulations that are going to govern your community. Zoning codes, speed limits, anything else that would find its way into an ordinance or resolution typically. These are generally applicable rules that establish standards of conduct for everyone. That's legislating. And in the legislative context, you don't need to worry about the appearance of fairness doctrine. Many of you also in your official position will wear a different kind of hat, and that's as an administrative role. Here, you're not formulating policy like you do when you're legislating, you're actually implementing it. And you typically do that when you approve a contract or appoint a particular official to a vacancy. You're acting administratively there typically rather than legislatively. The appearance of fairness doctrine doesn't apply in that context either. But the third hat that some of you may be wearing, depending on the kind of board or commission or council that you sit on, is when you're acting in a quasi-judicial setting. Quasi-judicial means like a judge or like a court proceeding, judicial. Think of that as an analogy. In this limited setting, you are acting essentially as a judge and or a jury, and it applies when you are considering the individual rights of particular property owners or particular properties in the land use context. The classic example of this is a site-specific rezone. If a particular applicant comes to the city and wants to rezone her property from low-density residential to high-intensity commercial, and her proposal only would involve her own property, that's a quasi-judicial setting. The proceeding that's going to happen as a result of that is quasi-judicial. The council is going to be sitting essentially as a judge and jury on that request, and it's not going to be applicable to any other properties. It's only going to be limited to just the applicant. It also applies when the council or various boards and commissions are entertaining an appeal by a particular party who has been aggrieved by a staff decision. In that case, you're acting again as a judge and jury, essentially like an appellate court, looking over what the lower official, typically the community development director or some other city staff member, has done, and deciding how the decision should ultimately stand or be reversed. In that case, again, you're dealing as a judge and jury. It's a quasi-judicial setting, and the appearance of fairness doctrine applies. So what does the appearance of fairness doctrine require? In a nutshell, it basically requires that these sort of quasi-judicial proceedings, these hearings that involve an appeal or a site-specific rezone or other matters that involve specific rights of individuals or specific pieces of property, that those proceedings not only be fair, but that they have to look fair. They have to appear fair, hence the appearance of fairness doctrine. And there are a few key elements of the appearance of fairness doctrine that I'll quickly run through. The first is, to the extent that you as a quasi-judicial decision maker are having one-sided or ex parte communications with people who are involved in the underlying proceedings, like, for example, the applicant for the rezone or a particular neighbor who opposes the rezone. Those sort of communications ideally should not happen at all. But to the extent that they do happen, they need to be disclosed publicly when the council or board conducts its hearing, its proceedings, and there needs to be an opportunity for anyone who wants to rebut the substance of that communication. The easy answer or recommendation from my perspective, though, is don't have those sort of one-sided communications to begin with. If someone tries to buttonhole you in a grocery store aisle and say, hey, listen, I understand you're going to be talking about the Smith rezone request tonight. I really don't want that to go through. Can you vote for a denial vote rather than an approval vote? Once you can sense that sort of conversation is beginning, my recommendation is just to cut it off, and then when the proceeding is started, just publicly disclose the fact that someone contacted you and began to say XYZ about the particular point of view that was being expressed, put it on the record, allow anyone else in the audience to try to rebut that, and then move on. The best approach is not to have those sort of communications in the first instance, but if they do happen, be prepared to disclose them. The second element of the appearance of fairness doctrine is a requirement that quasi-judicial decision makers can't have bias for or against particular parties or particular projects. And that would essentially be a due process violation because it would be so patently unfair if, for example, the presiding officer in a rezone proceeding began the hearing by saying, no matter what is said during the hearing tonight, no matter what evidence we receive and listen to, I am going to absolutely vote no on this. Would that appear fair? Absolutely not. And that's a violation of the appearance of fairness doctrine. That's the sort of comment that you should take pains to avoid whenever a quasi-judicial matter is coming before you. The third and final element of the appearance of fairness doctrine that we'll be discussing briefly tonight is the area or element of prejudgment. Just like you would want a judge that you would be going in front of as a party, a litigant in a civil or criminal case, to have prejudged the issues in your case and made up his or her mind before you even reach the courtroom, you wouldn't expect city council members sitting in judgment on your rezone request to have already made up their minds about whether a particular criteria for the rezone approval had or had not been satisfied. This is a long-winded way of saying that you need to keep an open mind when you entertain any quasi-judicial matter, and you need to look like you're maintaining an open mind. For all of that, I'd say that because it's an important aspect of municipal governance generally, but as a practical matter, the vast majority of you will not need to engage in any quasi-judicial decision-making, and for that reason, the appearance of fairness doctrine is hopefully going to be academic for most of you and probably will not need to be considered in most of what you do. Okay. We have just a couple of examples, and I'm going to let Jody quote these because her stage voice is much better than mine, and she's really good with the Disney characters, and I'm not. So go ahead.
This is Looney Tunes, just so you're aware. Elmer Fudd would like to change the zoning of his property. Because this item is only affecting one piece of property, the hearing would be quasi-judicial and subject to the appearance of fairness doctrine. Versus Elmer Fudd and neighbors Bugs Bunny, Yosemite Sam, and Daffy Duck want to change the text of the zoning code. This proposal affects multiple pieces of property that are subject to the code text in question and would go through a different legislative hearing process, not the quasi-judicial process.
And here again, the linchpin difference is in the first scenario involving Elmer Fudd, we're dealing with a proceeding, a hearing that involves a single piece of property and the rights of a single person, Elmer Fudd, versus the second scenario when we have multiple property owners talking about a change, which if it's ultimately agreed to by the city, would affect many, many, many properties and not just one. The first scenario is going to be subject to the appearance of fairness doctrine. because the city is going to be essentially acting as a judge and jury on that specific request. Whereas the second scenario is going to be a legislative policy-making undertaking, and you can be as biased and prejudgmental as you want in that. You're paid to have opinions, and in those scenarios, you can basically express them largely at will. So segueing from that into some general advice on what to do and what not to do when you are in open session of a particular meeting, or even when you're out in the community, talking with other citizens, dealing with your constituents, etc. What I want you to remember is that what you say in open session is basically recorded forever. Not necessarily electronically, although we do have tape recorded or electronically recorded meetings, but also in the minutes. And essentially, that's a scenario that you have to kind of keep in mind, that once you say something, it's out there in the ether of the community and the public and the media, etc. And it's very difficult to put that genie back in the bottle. So what should you absolutely not talk about in open session? First of all, as we touched on before, anything that you've learned in confidence, any confidential information that you learned in executive session or you learned elsewhere through your official position, you should maintain that confidence. Second, if there's a pending real estate transaction, and you know from closed door discussions or conversations with staff that the city's bargaining position or best offer or lead off offer is a particular dollar figure, you obviously don't want to divulge that publicly, because it's going to put the city at a huge disadvantage in the ensuing negotiations with the property owner. Next, hopefully also commonsensical, if the city is going to be involved in a lawsuit or is currently involved in litigation, you don't want to talk about that in open session or publicly in a manner that's going to jeopardize the city's legal strategy and legal interests in that lawsuit. And then finally, this is, I think, a really important point that comes up fairly commonly, and it's a very easy trap to fall into, and that is when you're talking about safety concerns, particularly safety concerns with public infrastructure like streets and sidewalks and park equipment, things like that. Your public comments regarding that should be kept at a general level, as opposed to a specific level that indicates that the city has done something wrong. For example, if someone trips and gets hurt on a city sidewalk, typically, as sympathetic as you might be in your heart, you typically don't want to say in open session anything that indicates that the city is at fault for liability purposes there.
Sorry, I just want to highlight the little highlight here. If you do receive a claim, a complaint, a question, or a concern, no matter the type of communication from a resident, refer that person to staff before responding with your own opinion. We can often respond fairly quickly. Staff has the knowledge, and even if staff does not have the knowledge about said tripping hazard, we want to know so we can get it fixed. And
so
then,
what's
go ahead.
the next slides, I'm not going to talk through them or quote them, but these are some real life examples of the kind of communications that you should be careful in engaging in, because as you can see from the context here, they're very, very well meaning. They're not malicious, they're not intended to cause any sort of harm or legal jeopardy, but because of the terminology that's used, they have the effect of conceding that the city did something wrong. And some plaintiff's attorney is going to latch onto that in a worst case scenario and use that to the city's detriment. So I encourage you at some point to kind of work through these slides on your own and kind of get a flavor of what's recommended and what isn't, and talking about issues of causation of injuries or danger or damage. And if you have any doubts about that, please consult with staff. They almost certainly have a strong position that they can convey to you on how to relate whatever concern you have back to your constituents without doing it in a way that's going to put the city in any sort of jeopardy. And I'll just very briefly mention one kind of example of this, and that's this concept of political engineering. And here again, it's often done very well-meaning, where city council or commission or board members will state in open session about what they think a particular intersection should look like, or the traffic counts in a particular calming scenario should be. It's entirely appropriate to make inquiry about that, but getting down into the minutia and directing staff on those sort of issues is really something that you should be concerned about. Those are the type of issues that should be reserved for your professional staff members and the city's consultants. Again, entirely appropriate for you to ask questions, but in offering opinions or stating concerns that could be construed as conceding liability or fault or danger, those are things that you should be cautious about. And going to the statements to avoid page is kind of a bullet pointed list of things not to say. Those are what you see on the page here. Those are music to a plaintiff personal injury attorney's ears. You want to make sure that you don't say things like this in relation to city infrastructure, streets, sidewalks, etc. Instead, think about it and then contact staff before making any sort of public opinion or comments. Okay. So in ending tonight, we have a list of 10 tips that we've come up with as recommendations for each of you. Hopefully these are kind of more or less rehashing what you've previously learned tonight, and with a few exceptions, but hopefully these are commonsensical. We'll kind of walk through them. They're deliberately written in non-legalese, so hopefully they're understandable as a general rule. The first is keep your public life separate from your private life. To the extent that you can, use city email and city social media accounts to conduct city-related business, and don't commingle your personal private content in those city-related communications. Going back to one of Jody's comments when we were discussing the Public Records Act, I think it's really important here to always remember that just because a particular document or statement in a document might be embarrassing to you, that is not a legally compelling reason to keep that document out of public disclosure. If we get a public record request for that, the fact that you may have said something in an otherwise government-related document that could embarrass you or embarrass someone else, it's typically not going to be a basis for us to withhold that document or to redact the embarrassing statements. The easy solution there is to divide your public life strictly from your private life to the extent that you can, and limit your public comments, your public communications to public city-oriented matters, and don't intermingle them with private matters. Second, this is the exact same concept, but in a slightly different way. Keep your public life separate from your political life. For those of you who are running for public office locally, I know this is a difficult and sometimes nebulous dividing line between where city business ends and where your political campaigning begins. And for that reason, you should try to always keep in mind that you are operating either as a public campaigner, a campaigner for public office, or as a public official, and make it clear, particularly during campaign season and you're communicating on social media, etc., which of those hats that you're wearing. And that will hopefully help a lot of embarrassment or concern or confusion going forward. If the city, for example, gets a public record request that includes records that have both political content and normal public business contained in them. There's also a separate rule under Washington law that we haven't really talked a lot about tonight. It's a little bit beyond the scope of this evening's presentation, and that is that Washington law, as a general matter, prohibits the use of public facilities, city facilities, for campaign purposes. So, for example, you should not be using, if you have a city vehicle, for example, you shouldn't be using that to go doorbelling for your city council election campaign. You shouldn't be using city letterhead that you received from the city copy room to send out your flyers for your campaign. Things like that. If you ever have a question on that, please obviously reach out to staff and get guidance as well. And then the third is think before you press send. This is really, really important, I think, for all of us. I wish I had kind of followed my own advice on this at various points in my career. Probably some of the biggest mistakes I've made and things that I wish that I could track the genie back into the bottle were things that I pressed send on emails before walking around the block or catching my breath and being kind of caught up in the moment like that. I think that those instances have reflected poorly on me personally and professionally, and I wish I could take some of those back. That's particularly important for you as public officials, because once you do press send, once the public record, as it's broadly defined, has been created, it's out there, and it's out there for the duration of the retention schedule, and it's going to be produced if there's ever a request for that category of record by your staff. So the better approach is take a deep breath before you create the record in the first place, and don't send it unless you're comfortable with the content. And as Jody intimated earlier, I think the real standard here, the best one that I've ever heard in all of my legal travels, is the one that's quoted here on the page in front of you. When you're about to create a public record, ask yourself whether you would be comfortable seeing your comments quoted on the front page of the local newspaper. That's a real thing, because 99 times out of 100, what you write is going to be fully disclosable if the city gets a request for that document. So think about it before you create the document, and you'll save yourself a lot of headache, and you'll save the city a lot of effort and potentially a lot of expense. Next, please. In that same vein, the fourth piece of advice here is think before you speak in open session. Ask yourself whether the public statements that you're about to make are going to potentially implicate liability or risk for the city, that political engineering that we just discussed, whether it would be divulging confidential information, or if you're in the middle of a quasi-judicial proceeding, whether it would suggest or imply some type of bias or prejudgment that would disqualify you and potentially place the city's ultimate decision in that matter at a risk of being reversed on appeal. And while the slide here indicates that this is advice specifically for what you say in open session, I think it's also good sage advice for anything that you say. Whether you're at the local Starbucks talking to one of your constituents, whether you're in the grocery store aisle talking amongst yourselves, anything that you say publicly, think about it first and ask yourself, is this going to have some negative implication or divulge some content that shouldn't be divulged? Next, when discussing city-related business outside of an open public meeting, stop to consider whether some or all of your fellow council or board or commission members are or may be also involved in that discussion. And this is very important in the specific context of social media, in comment threads, in Twitter feeds, in text messages, and email chains, where a quorum of council or board members might not exist all together all at once, all at the same time, but through people commenting over a lengthy duration, they can effectively have a meeting that would technically be unlawful under the Open Public Meeting Act. So again, as Jody indicated, be careful of that. Keep that in mind. Don't reply all to messages that the other council or board members are CC'd on, and you can kind of steer clear of that concern. Next, this is a broad topic that we could speak for hours on, but I think just to kind of keep this in mind, I think it benefits everyone, and that is stay in your lane. Each of you as public officials belong to a particular board, commission, or council that has a specific prescribed role and responsibility under state law and or the city's codes and procedures. And that's where your focus should be. You should not step off the four corners of that and interject yourself into an area where you don't really have the charter or license to do that. That is particularly appropriate in site-specific or project-specific land use matters, personnel matters, engineering issues, and management decisions. And I'll just give you one example there. If you look at Washington case law, all the precedent that Washington courts have developed over the years, the biggest damage claims have been implicated in situations where a city council or some other public body has circumvented and interjected itself into a particular land use decision-making process to the detriment of project applicants. Those have been very, very well-meaning council members in those cases that I'm referring to. They're essentially just responding to citizen concerns, neighbors who don't want a particular project to happen, that like their neighborhood the way it is and don't want to see it transformed with a new multifamily building or a new 100-lot subdivision. But in the end, if the city council or board or commission doesn't have a prescribed role in a particular land use development project, you should not be interjecting yourself into that procedure. You shouldn't be giving staff direction on how a particular project should be approved or disapproved or conditioned. Again, stay in your lane. That's a very, very important kind of 10,000 foot look level recommendation, but it's a very important one from a liability standpoint. And as a kind of a corollary to that, keep in mind that as members of a particular body, whether it's a council, board, or commission, you are one of several other people. Your power flows from a majority vote of your particular body. You typically don't have a lot of power when you're speaking as an individual. So it's not appropriate for you to suggest through your public statements that you're speaking on behalf of the planning commission when you know that the other 6 members of the planning commission disagree with you on this particular point. It does happen. I've been very fortunate in that in Monroe, it does not seem to happen very often, and I think that's a credit to all of you and to your predecessors on the various boards and commissions and councils that you serve on. But it's important to keep that in mind. The council should be speaking with one voice, and that's its majority voice. The same thing for all of you when you're speaking on behalf of a particular board or commission. I won't belabor the quasi-judicial issues again, because again, I don't believe that many of you will have need to deal in a quasi-judicial setting. But if you find yourself in one, if you're entertaining a site-specific rezone or dealing with an appeal hearing or something of that type that deals with the individual rights of particular people or particular properties, make it look like you're being open-minded, that you are approaching the decisional process without bias or prejudgment, and that you are abstaining from or trying your best to avoid ex parte communications, one-sided conversations with people who are actually involved in that proceeding, parties of record. When in doubt, err on the side of caution. This is kind of music to my ears. I'm a fairly conservative fellow generally when it comes to legal risk issues. And what I will tell you is that particularly when we're talking about these open government laws, the Open Public Meeting Act and the Public Records Act, the deck is stacked against public agencies if we ever go to court on that. There is a very, very strong presumption and a very, very strong encouragement in both of those statutes in favor of openness, in favor of transparency, in favor of providing access to your decisional process, in favor of producing public records when they've been requested. As we talked about before, both of those statutes have various exceptions to them, whether exceptions that allow you to have an executive session during your council meeting, exception in the Public Records Act that allows you to keep particular types of documents or types of information out of public disclosure. They exist for a purpose, and they can be used. But as a general rule, all of those exceptions are going to be narrowly construed by reviewing courts, meaning again that it's going to be an uphill battle for the city to try to rely on those unless we have an extremely strong footing to do that with very good facts. Finally, this is your price of admission tonight, number 9 on the slide. If there's one thing that you take away from today's presentation, I hope it is this: consult with city staff early and often about any questions. There are no stupid questions. You are not expected to know chapter and verse out of all the Washington laws that we've discussed tonight. There's absolutely no way. I'd be disappointed if any of you tried to do that. It's too thick, it's too dense, it's too detailed. You don't need to get into that granular level to do your job correctly. What I hope that you have or are able to take away from this presentation is the ability to spot issues, to recognize a concern when a particular matter comes before you or where you're involved in a particular matter, such that you can think, wow, you know, it almost sounds like something that bald guy at that council meeting a while back was talking about, something to do with ethics. I should go talk to the city clerk about that. Same thing for public records, same thing for any open public meeting act requirement, et cetera, et cetera. Contact staff, that's what they're there for. They've seen most of this stuff before, and they're by and large be able to answer your questions very easily and very directly. My strong recommendation in doing that is to present that type of question, to raise the issue at some point other than during the meeting that the issue comes to a head at, because that doesn't provide for an optimal opportunity for myself and staff to analyze it, review it, and provide a correct legal answer. If you give staff enough time, there will almost always be a correct response that will help keep you out of hot water and help keep the city out of hot water. Again, most of these issues can be addressed easily. Finally, if you think you may have made a mistake, and to err is human, we've all made mistakes, it's not that big a deal. As long as you call it to staff's attention, there's typically an opportunity for appropriate mitigation measures to occur after the fact. But the converse is not true. If you are aware that a mistake has been made, for example, if you didn't give up a particular piece of paper or writing, a public record, when you were asked to do so by the city clerk, and then it comes out later that we wrongfully withheld that document in the face of a public record request, that can have very significant negative consequences for the city. So if you're aware of something like that, bring it to the staff's attention sooner rather than later, and allow the city to stop the bleeding on potential liability or risk. So that is essentially the end of our presentation. We're very happy to answer any questions that you may have. And just as a reminder, if you think of something later on after the meeting tonight adjourns, you're always welcome to contact Jody or myself, and we're happy to help you in any way that we can.
All right, thank you. And we're not accepting letters of resignation. This is so I just want to say how much I appreciate the fact that each and every one of you has stood up to want to be part of our community and serve on our boards, commissions, council. I know that I've had conversations with people that have wanted to run for office, that have run for office. We see people on the national and state level and other cities that say things that make you wonder how much they're considering what it is that Zach and Jody have just gone through here. I think that there's, in the media and everything, this thought that you can just be careless and make statements and do all of these things and reveal information and not care about who you're talking to. There are a lot of rules about what we can and cannot do. And those rules are there for a reason. They're there for transparency, to maintain confidence for our residents that we represent. And when, you know, that's why the rules exist. To have a functioning democracy means that the people deserve a right to know what's going on, and we have to operate within these parameters. So, you know, I encourage each of you to look over the material again. As hard as it is, you know, especially with social media these days, you know, when I started off as a council member in 2003, social media wasn't a thing. You know, you have the newspaper, and sometimes you got contacted, and you were usually careful about what you said in the newspaper. These days, 2 a.m. in the morning, you might wake up, not be able to get back to sleep, and just start hopping on social media. You may see and say something you don't need to say. You may see something posted on social media that really frustrates you because you know that that's not true. You may start engaging in it, and you had me at insert blank here, or whatever the case is. It's really hard when you're in the know that what you're reading is not correct, mischaracterizes a statement that you've made, but you've got to be careful, okay? You are officials now for the city of Monroe, and you just need to be careful. What Jody and Zach said, if you ever have a question, reach out to your staff liaisons right away, okay? The council knows that if they've got a question, to reach out to me and or Deborah, our city administrator, and we'll get people in contact with people to make, directors to make certain you get the information that you need. If a resident comes up to you and is complaining about something, expressing concern about something, listen, again, quasi-judicial and everything aside, but, listen to their concern about crosswalk safety or whatever the case is, but be careful what you say. It's okay, for me, it's okay to listen, but realize there's always more information to the story. And that's what the staff is here to do, is to give you that information. And in some cases, then act to respond to the resident about the concern or the complaint or the idea as opposed to you. So, and with all that said, I'm going to do what I normally do. Zach, Jody, is there anything that I said you want to clarify?
No, I think you said it very well from my perspective.
I'm good.
Okay, thank you. And Zach leaned into the microphone, it's not there.
Force of habit.
I know. Okay, so what we're going to do is see if anybody has any questions, and then we will recess so that we can allow people to leave who would like to leave, allow for a restroom break for people who need it or just want it, and then we'll go into strategic priorities and strategic plan. All right. So questions. Turn to board members and commissioners first. If you have a question, grab hold of that orange flag and wave it back and forth. To the council. Oh, okay.
The flag's over there.
It is over there. Okay. Cross over
The
here.
coffee flag.
Yeah,
It's dry.
yeah. Thank you, Mayor. No question, just, I guess a comment. The one thing that stuck with me, I've been on council 12 years now, and Zach has been there since the beginning. The one thing that has stuck with me from the beginning is that his famous words are, out of abundance of caution, let's do this, or let's not do that. And so I remember times where sitting council members were on boards of organizations or were employed by businesses that the city was going to deal with. And they just said, I'm going to recuse myself. And they left the chambers, and it was no big deal. We all knew that, and there was no judgment, there was no wondering, And then when we were done deliberating, they came back, and then we continued, and it was just fine. And so, in your different committees and things like that, if there's anything that's like, boy, I'm not really sure, I remember asking when the city was gonna be doing something with the YMCA, this was years ago, and I said, my kids were members of the Y, like we go there. Is that okay, or should I step out? And that, Zach said, no, that's fine. Because at some point you gotta draw the line, right? Otherwise there's gonna be nobody left in the room to decide and make the decision, so. That's all.
And yes, there is a rule that if there is nobody left for a quorum, that there is the rule of necessity or the quorum of necessity?
That's exactly correct. It applies when you're dealing with the appearance of fairness doctrine. If all of the council members or a quorum of them have to recuse themselves because they've been disqualified from entertaining a particular quasi-judicial matter, the rule is that you have to bring them all back in because there's no one else left to make the decision. That is the rule of necessity.
I actually dealt with that on an issue when I was a council member. So where I'm going with that is that the belt suspenders, and I know you say belt and suspenders, but I always say belt, suspenders, helmet, and foam, airbag. We try to be extremely cautious here. We're risk averse when it comes to these sorts of things, and yes, we will still get the work done, even if that means a quorum of people need to walk out of the room, because there's a rule for that. So, Any other questions or comments from council members? Okay, before we recess, I did note during the meeting that we only have 5 council members present, so I just need to say for the record that Councilmember Fisher had mentioned that he would not be here this evening, so unless there's objection, we will consider his absence as excused. Seeing no objection, he's excused. All right, we're going to recess now. I thank you all for coming. If you'd like to listen to the next part, you're welcome to hang out and listen. And we will be in recess until 7:40, so that's about 11 minutes for recess. Okay? Thank you, everybody. All right, we are back in session. Thank you all for going through the 4.1 and 4.2. We're now moving on to 4.3 under discussion items. This is the 2023 strategic priorities and 2023-2027 strategic plan review. Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this item. It's really coming back to the council just as a reminder of what the process is to adopt the strategic priorities and the strategic plan, and to talk a little bit about what's going to be different about it this year, because we're also adopting the 2044 comprehensive plan. So I just wanted to remind the council that the strategic priorities, there's two documents, the strategic priorities and the strategic plan. So the priorities are the list of projects that the council is wanting to accomplish over the next 5 years. And those are broken up into 6 categories based upon Imagine Monroe. So there's accessible parks and healthy waterways, support local, build community, friendly and responsive, create connections, and ensure a safe space. And in the past, the council has adopted the strategic priorities and the strategic plan concurrent with that year's budget. And the projects that land on the list are those things that are multi-year projects, because the intent behind this is that these projects take a long time to accomplish, either because it takes an amount of staff resources over a couple of years to get the project done, or because we have to raise the financial resources in order to accomplish the project. What's interesting, I think, about the strategic priorities and the strategic plan both is there are projects that sometimes sit on that list for an extended period of time. It's a living document, and so we update that list every year during the budget process, and it's kind of a rolling list. So it offers the council an opportunity to kind of reevaluate what projects you want to get done over the next 5 years, potentially, change that priority list. We've had on the list of strategic priorities and the strategic plan the festival lot, for example. I mean, it was on a list in a park and recreation open space plan that was adopted in 1974, right? So these are not projects necessarily that get done even in a 5-year period. Sometimes projects have to sit on that list because council wants to accomplish those projects, but the timing just isn't right for whatever reason. But when the timing is right, if that project is on the list, it allows then the council to act quickly in order to accomplish something that you've been wanting to finalize for an extended period of time in some cases. I think the key issue really for this coming year, and the reason why we wanted to bring this to you early in January, to just keep in the back of your mind as we begin to go through the budget calendar that Becky Hassard, our finance director, put together, is we have another layer that we need to consider this year, and that's the 2044 comprehensive plan. So the projects that you see on the list currently, the 2023 priorities, and then the 5-year plan, where we actually kind of lay out those priorities over a series of years in order to get them accomplished, the majority of those projects have come out of the 2015 comprehensive plan. We went back and we looked at the projects that were in the 2015 comprehensive plan. We looked at projects that were in the previous downtown master plan, the tourism promotion and marketing plan, like all of those plans that we have adopted, back in 2015 and 2016, and even before, because I think the downtown plan was actually adopted in 2008. All of those plans have project lists. And in order to ensure that those projects are at some point going to get done, they have to move off a project list and into this plan, because this is where the council, this is the tool that the council uses then to align your staff resources and your finances together. So the plan that we have in place now is based upon the 2015 comprehensive plan, your 6-year capital improvement plan, your 6-year financial forecast, your I made a list of all the things that were on here, IT strategic plan, the community needs assessment that was done for our human services work that we're doing now. So when we adopt those plans, we have to take those lists and figure out where in our 5-year strategic plan are those projects going to live? And then you have to go through the exercise of deciding, well, what's a priority? Because everything can't be a priority. You have to make some decision around what's going to get accomplished and when. So going into 2024, when we're putting together the 2025 and 2026 biennial budget, in a normal budget process year, we would be developing that strategic priorities list and the 5-year strategic plan concurrently with the budget. So you're adopting at the end of the year then your strategic priority list, your 2-year budget, and then that gives us then the pathway forward then through the next 2 years. And then as council, that mayor and staff are working to accomplish those goals that you've identified. You have the list. And when your constituents are asking you, well, what is it that the city is working on? What's a priority? You can point back to this plan. And we update the plan, we come to you mid-year, and we show you what's been accomplished, and you can see in the materials tonight, that list of accomplishments in mid-2023, and we'll provide another update for you again in mid-2024. What is going to complicate, I think, the process this year is that we are also now updating the 2044 comprehensive plan. That will have a set of goals and priorities, a set of guiding principles, and then a list of projects in order to implement your 20-year comprehensive plan. And so I've been thinking about and talking with mayor and staff about, what is the timeline in order to try and bring these very large documents together. We've got a 2-year budget to accomplish. We've got a 2044 comprehensive plan to adopt, and we've got utility rates to update. So there's a lot of work on the plate. I think we're going to try and see if we can bring everything together by the end of the year, this year. So we're adopting our strategic priorities along with the comprehensive plan and these other things that we have to do in 2024. But it may be that it makes more sense for us to hold back on doing the strategic priorities and strategic plan until the first quarter of 2025. That way we can adopt the comprehensive plan. We would have the time then to go back through that, talk with boards and commissions, bring forward recommendations as to what do we see kind of are the new priorities. It may be that those new priorities become very apparent to us as we're working on the comprehensive plan and putting together, the strategic priorities and strategic plan just becomes very apparent, very quickly, in which case we'll bring it on forward. But I just wanted council to have an opportunity to talk a little bit about that timing and provide some input as Mayor Thomas is working to put together this year the mayor's recommended budget to bring to council in September. So it's a little less certain this year than I think it's been in the past, but I do think that the 2044 comprehensive plan is going to provide some very meaningful and important input into what it is the community thinks that we should be working on over the next 20 years to try and achieve some of our long-range goals and the vision that has been articulated and imagined throughout. So that's really all I had to share with council. I did provide, again, in your materials, just a reminder of what's on that list and how that list was put together. But as the comprehensive plan materials are coming to you and there's new guiding principles and new goals, you need to, I think, begin to consider how does that work into this strategic plan and what are you all seeing and hearing from community members about priorities moving forward for the next 5 years. So it's an opportunity for a reset. Or as Lane said during the break, it's a fresh rain.
It's a fresh what?
Rain.
Oh, fresh rain.
It's a fresh rain.
So are there any questions right now? Again, this is just intended to remind you where things are, and certainly for our newer council member and the other 2 council members. Just there's a cycle that you go through every 10 years. Is it Lance now for the comp plan? Every 10 years? I get confused because at one point it was 7 and then 5 and all right. So every 10 years you redo the comp plan. The comp plan is that overarching policy document for a lot of like more physical improvements to the city and how private development is going to occur. The budget is actually how you're going to fund your priorities. And in between the comp plan and the budget, you've got all of these more detailed plans. And what's interesting is, as you look through these, you're going to see, I think probably about half of these have been actually completed. So, yeah, so when these things actually mean something, and you hear about plans just being set on the shelf and gathering dust and everything, these plans actually get activated. We do these 5-year plans, and we work with very talented staff to come up with ways to get grant dollars to fund things. Sometimes the festival lot will pop up, and it's been there since I was, what was it, 1972? 74, okay. So I was 4 years old when some council member put it on the list, right? So 49 years ago, it goes on the list, and now it's being purchased. So, and sometimes it's faster. But if it's not on the list, it makes it harder for us to do things. And what's interesting about that is we're actually implementing something that your predecessors approved a long time ago. So take this stuff seriously, look it over, celebrate, pause and celebrate on those things we got done. When people tell you the government never does anything, let them know, yeah, we do. They tell you it takes too long, say, yeah, sometimes it does, but if it means something and we're going to prioritize it, we're going to get it done. So take a look at it. Go ahead, Councilmember Beaumont.
Just curious, along those lines, yes, I've read through this and was really thrilled to see that a lot of it has been done or is underway. Do we share this with the public? I mean, they certainly can get on our website and access some of this information, but I think this kind of things needs to be shared. It's really positive for the city. It shows that we are working on these things and accomplishing a lot. And I agree about the comp plan and coming back and seeing what emerges, but there's a lot of good to say now.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if there's any plan for public outreach or any kind of postings on our Facebook page or anything like that that would sort of tune our horn.
Yeah, we certainly talk with staff about how we can share that information more broadly. Certainly as we, the mayor, the executive branch and the legislative branch are updating the comp plan and doing this stuff, that's messaging that we can and should be getting out there so that people understand as we're having charrettes and meeting with people, including you all, with the people just to share this stuff with them, right? So, yeah, I don't know if we've got like a full-on idea on how to advertise it, but I think certainly through the process of this year, it's a good time with updating the comp plan for us to really highlight what we've been able to do. So, anything else to add?
I don't have anything else to add. I think, I guess I do have one more thing to add, and that's thinking ahead to just about the funding options that the council is going to need to consider as a part of the 2025-2026 budget. And some of the projects on the list can only be accomplished if we consider some new revenue sources. And again, we'll be coming back as part of the mayor's recommended budget and updating the city council on some of those alternatives to consider as you're thinking about which one of these or which of these priorities do you want to move forward on over the next 5 years.
And for the three of you that may not have been through this, or maybe you went through it, but you were newer in your positions, we have a calendar that we go through. I think we've already shared the calendar with them. One of the things that I want to make certain that I understand by roughly May is what your policy priorities are. Because again, the council is responsible for policy and for budget. And when I'm talking about policy priorities, I'm talking in particular policy priorities that require funding. So we'll be coming back to you and just talking with you about what it is you're interested in seeing in the budget. When we give budget instructions to the staff in June. One of the things that I'll do is sort of lay out what we're thinking in terms of revenues, expenditures based on looking at the economy and all sorts of things. Staff will then come in with sort of packages or priorities. These are the things we would request that you do. And then I make some decisions on that in the August timeframe, and then we bring that into the council right around the end of September, beginning of October, which is earlier than required by state law. And then hopefully when I bring things to you, there aren't surprises in there. Hopefully we've had a chance to talk through what it is you're interested in seeing, and that's kind of how we've been able to do things in this community, at least for the last 10 years. I think that's it.
I think that is it.
Yeah. All right, any other questions, comments, good jokes? Oh, Jake's thinking, okay. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
It was a question, right? Okay, go ahead.
The safety committee meeting is Thursday at 4:00.
Thursday, the 15th,
What?
Thursday, February 15th, so not next week, the week following, 4 o'clock. And as of this moment, we're planning on being in the temporary city hall conference room. If that changes, we'll let you know.
Yes, across the way.
Across the way.
Treehouse. Yes, Councilwoman Hanford.
Just a reminder, I will be absent from the council meeting on February 13th.
Okay, thank you.
That's our next meeting now.
Yes.
Next week's canceled, so just a heads up.
Okay, I think even though we don't have councilman reports and mayor reports, I do want to share, since it is timely, that Deborah, Zach, and I went down to Olympia yesterday. I took the day off from work. We met with seven different legislators yesterday. We did that from 8:30 to 12:30. So any of you who have been down to Olympia, you know that that's back to back. We met with Senator Monroe. We met with Representatives Steele and Gaynor. We met with Representative Lowe, Representative Eslick. Oh, right, yeah, Senator Lovett. There's only 6.
At least.
Yep, that was, okay, so 6. All right, I thought it was 7. And we had really great conversations with all of them. They each spent, at least 15 minutes with us, just sort of listening to the things on the legislative priorities for this year. We talked about State Route 522. We talked about requesting another $1 million for the therapeutic court. Since the cost overruns, the cost of the project is more than the engineer's estimates, not overruns per se, but just the engineer's estimate was a little too low. We also talked about the railroad crossings, and we talked about mobile mental health. We made certain that we thanked each of them for their investments that they've made in those in the past. They're all very interested in the therapeutic court. They're all very interested in mobile mental health. I got the sense that there's not going to be much room to do a whole lot this year with State Route 522 because it's a short session, and there are cost overruns right now with transportation projects statewide. Apparently, the cost has been substantially higher than originally anticipated when the last revenue package went through for the projects. Really, to be able to get funding for 522 and better fund that project, we're probably looking at a long session like next year to talk about revenue packages and things like that. So one of the things I think part of our model when we were there was do no damage, do no harm. Yeah, do no harm. Basically, we were there just to remind them that we want 522 done. Please don't change anything with what we already have, since things were improved last year, but it's still not at the 250 or more million that is necessary to finish 522. Is there anything else we want to report? Okay. So I thought that that'd be timely, since you're going to be seeing those legislators next week. And I will not be going with you because I took my day off this week to go down with them rather than being able to do the 2 days next week. I think unless there is anything else for the council members or anybody else from staff to share, we are adjourned without objection. Are you objecting?
Not objecting.
Okay.
I think I can speak on behalf of the council in extending our condolences to Councilman Campbell.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Like, take a motion to adjourn?
There's no motion. So unless there's objection, we are adjourned, and thank you.
Abundance of caution.